For 15 years, I ran a small nonprofit for foster children out of a tiny, rented office above a hardware store. My husband's family never called it a career, just a cute little hobby. Then at my mother-in-law's 70th birthday dinner, my sister-in-law stood up in front of 40 relatives, smiled and said, "Let's be honest. Claire just plays with foster kids while the rest of us actually built something." The whole room laughed. I smiled, finished my dinner, and said nothing. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was the county. The offer they made didn't just change my life. It changed everyone else's too. My name's Claire. I'm 46 years old. And I've been married to my husband, Tom, for 19 years. Tom's family owns Whitfield Logistics, a trucking and commercial property company his father, Richard, built from the ground up back in the 70s. Around their dinner table, the business was always the main topic. New contracts, new trucks, new warehouse deals. They talked about those numbers the way some families talk about football scores. 15 years ago, after volunteering at a local shelter, I started something small of my own. At first, it was just me and one part-time assistant, helping foster families navigate the system, connecting children with tutors, therapists, and everyday essentials that too many people overlooked. I rented a tiny office above a hardware store because it was all I could afford. Honestly, it didn't matter what it looked like. Nobody in Tom's family had ever asked to see it anyway. Every family dinner followed the same pattern. Richard would talk about expanding the business. Rebecca, my sister-in-law, would brag about another big client her marketing firm had landed. Then when there was finally a quiet moment, I'd mention that we'd helped another 12 foster children find stable homes that month. Someone would smile politely. Someone else might nod. Then the conversation would drift right back to trucks, contracts, and profits, as if the children we helped somehow mattered less. That was just how things were. I'd gotten used to it, or at least, I thought I had. Then my mother-in-law, Diane, turned 70. The whole family rented a private room at her favorite restaurant. Nearly 40 relatives showed up. It was one of those evenings where everyone was dressed up, the wine kept flowing, and people smiled for pictures like everything in the family was perfect. Halfway through dessert, Diane stood up and tapped her glass. The room went quiet. Even Tom looked surprised. She smiled proudly and said she and Richard had made a decision. The family lake house, the one where everyone had spent summers growing up, would be left to Rebecca and her husband. "They've truly built something to be proud of," Diane said. "We want the house to stay with the more accomplished side of the family." The room filled with applause. I remember sitting perfectly still. Under the table, Tom reached for my hand and squeezed it gently. But he never said a word. A few minutes later, Rebecca stood up with a wine glass in her hand. She smiled at everyone before looking directly at me. "I just want to say something. With love." A few people laughed. She smiled even wider. "I think it's wonderful that some people find little passion projects. Not everybody needs a real career to feel fulfilled." Then she pointed at me. "Let's be honest. Claire just plays with foster kids while the rest of us actually built something." The room erupted with laughter. Not everyone laughed, but enough people did. Enough that it echoed through the entire room. I looked down at my napkin. My face burned. I hadn't felt that embarrassed since I was 16 years old. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply smiled, thanked Diane for a lovely evening, and went home. Tom apologized almost the entire drive. I knew he meant every word. The problem wasn't his apology. The problem was, he never said any of those words when I actually needed him to. 3 days later, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, I was sitting in my little office above the hardware store, catching up on paperwork when my phone rang. It was a local number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. "Claire Whitfield?" the man asked. "Yes, this is Marcus Webb, Director of the County Department of Children and Family Services. Do you have a few minutes?" I sat up a little straighter. Over the years, we'd worked with the county on a few small projects, but I'd never spoken directly with the director. Not once. Marcus got straight to the point. For the past year, the county had quietly reviewed every foster support organization across our 3-county region. They looked at everything: placement success, family retention, costs, long-term outcomes, even how many children ended up back in the system. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Claire, your organization ranked number 1. I honestly thought I'd heard him wrong," he continued. "You have the highest successful placement rate in the region, 4 years in a row. You also have the lowest reentry rate into foster care. And you've accomplished it with less than half the budget of the larger organizations." For a moment, I couldn't say anything. I just sat there staring out the office window, 15 years, thousands of volunteer hours, late nights, fundraisers, grant applications, all the work nobody in my husband's family had ever bothered to notice. Someone had noticed. Marcus cleared his throat. There's another reason I'm calling. I took a deep breath. I'm listening. The county is opening bids for a new 5-year regional contract. Whoever wins it will oversee foster placement and family support services across all 3 counties. He paused for a moment. Claire, we'd like your organization to submit a formal proposal. I leaned back in my chair. A contract that size could completely change our nonprofit. I asked the first question that came to mind. Who else is bidding? There was a brief silence. Then Marcus said, this may sound familiar. Whitfield Logistics submitted a proposal for a related transportation and housing services contract a couple of years ago. They weren't selected. When I saw your last name, I figured there might be a connection. I blinked. Richard had never mentioned it. Not once. Funny. He never seemed to bring up the contracts he didn't win. Over the next 3 weeks, my tiny team worked harder than we ever had before. Some nights we stayed until midnight. Other nights we ordered cheap pizza and kept going anyway. We pulled together 15 years of data. Success stories, financial reports, letters from foster parents, testimonials from children who had grown into adults. Everything we'd quietly built, without anyone in my husband's family ever asking to see any of it. Finally, the county announced a public meeting. Every organization that submitted a proposal was invited. So was anyone from the community who wanted to attend. Tom looked at me and smiled. Invite my family. I looked at him, surprised. Are you sure? He nodded. Win or lose, I want them to finally understand what you've spent 15 years building. So I sent the invitations. Diane replied that she and Richard would be there. She casually mentioned Richard. Also had an interest in one of the county contracts being discussed. Rebecca responded too. Wouldn't miss it. I couldn't tell if she was curious or expecting another reason to laugh at me. The morning of the meeting, I stood outside the county administration building, holding my presentation folder. I had no idea whether we'd win, but for the first time in 15 years, the work I'd quietly devoted my life to was about to stand beside everything my husband's family had always called a real success. And this time, the numbers were finally going to speak for themselves. The meeting was held in one of those plain county administration buildings. Nothing fancy. Fluorescent lights, folding chairs, coffee and paper cups. About 60 people showed up, mostly county employees, a few nonprofit directors, and my husband's family sitting together near the back. I noticed them the moment I walked in. Richard, Diane, Rebecca. None of them smiled. Marcus Webb stepped to the podium and welcomed everyone. Then he spent nearly 20 minutes explaining how the county had evaluated every organization, placement success, long-term family stability, financial accountability, emergency response times. Every decision, he explained, was based entirely on measurable results. No politics, no personal relationships, just the numbers. I sat quietly with my hands folded in my lap. The same hands that had packed backpacks for frightened children, written grant applications at midnight, and held crying foster parents who thought they were failing. Marcus clicked to the next slide. 3 organizations appeared on the screen. Mine was one of them. Another was Whitfield Logistics, listed under one of their community services divisions. I blinked. I hadn't realized Richard had submitted another proposal this year. Marcus calmly walked through each category. No dramatic pauses, no speeches, just facts, successful placements. Our organization ranked first. Family retention. First again, emergency response. First, cost efficiency. First. Every new slide looked exactly like the one before it. Our name stayed at the top. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. The room had gone completely silent. Then Marcus closed his folder. He smiled and said the words I'd spent 15 years hoping to hear. After a year-long independent review, the Department of Children and Family Services has unanimously selected Claire, Whitfield's organization, to manage the new regional foster support contract. For a second, nobody moved. Then the room erupted into applause. Not polite applause. Real applause. County employees stood first, then several foster parents, then people I'd never even met. I felt tears filling my eyes. Not because we'd won, because after 15 years, someone had finally seen the work. I slowly turned toward the back of the room. Richard sat perfectly still. His eyes never left the screen. Diane looked back and forth between him and me, as though she was trying to understand how she'd completely missed this part of my life. Rebecca didn't say a word. For the first time since I'd known her, She had absolutely nothing to say. After the meeting, I was gathering my papers when I heard someone call my name. It was Richard. He had come alone, without Diane, without Rebecca. He looked tired, older somehow. Claire. He paused. I honestly didn't know. I didn't know your organization had become this important. I smiled gently. You never asked. He lowered his eyes. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he nodded. You're right. I never did. After another quiet moment, he cleared his throat. Our company still handles transportation across the region. If you're ever looking for a logistics partner, he hesitated, almost embarrassed. I'd appreciate the chance to earn your business. Not because we were family, because he'd finally realized I was running something real. I looked at him for a second. Then I smiled. I'll consider every proposal the same way the county did. The best one will earn it. He gave a small nod. For the first time in 15 years, Richard Whitfield wasn't looking at me like his son's wife. He was looking at me like an equal. The following week, my phone rang again. This time, it was Diane. Her voice sounded different, quieter, almost nervous. Claire, would you have lunch with me? Just the two of us? For a second, I honestly didn't know what to say. In 19 years, my mother-in-law had never once invited me to lunch alone. Not once. We met at a little cafe just around the corner from my office. When she arrived, I offered to show her where I'd worked all these years. She followed me upstairs. It was the first time she'd ever stepped inside. She looked around slowly. The office wasn't impressive. A few worn desks, old filing cabinets, a coffee maker that had probably seen better days. But the walls told a different story. There were photographs of foster families, handwritten thank you notes, crayon drawings from children who'd finally found permanent homes. One framed letter simply read, "Thank you for believing in me when nobody else did." Diane stood there quietly. She didn't say a word for almost a full minute. Finally, she turned toward me. Claire, I owe you an apology. I stayed silent. At my birthday, I called your work a hobby. Her eyes filled with tears. The truth is, I never bothered to understand what you spent 15 years building. And that's on me. I nodded slowly. It hurt. More than you probably realized. Not because of the lake house, and not because of Rebecca. It hurt because I spent 15 years trying to help children, who had already been told they weren't worth much. Then I came home and heard the same thing about my own work. Diane lowered her eyes. She quietly wiped away a tear. After a long silence, she spoke again. Richard and I talked. If you still want it, the lake house should be yours and Tom's. I smiled gently. Then I shook my head. Thank you, but it was never about the house. I already have everything I spent 15 years working for. She looked confused. I glanced around the little office, at the photographs, the thank you letters, the children's drawings. Respect. That's all I ever wanted. A few weeks later, Rebecca called. The apology sounded rehearsed. Careful, almost uncomfortable. I wasn't sure she'd completely understood what she'd done. But I accepted it anyway, not because she'd earned forgiveness, because I no longer needed her approval. Richard's company eventually became the transportation partner for the county program. Not because we were family, because they submitted the best proposal, just like everyone else. Funny how fairness has a way of changing people. These days, Tom and I still have Sunday dinner with his family. The conversations are different now. When someone asks how work is going, they don't call it my hobby anymore. They call it my organization. Sometimes, I think back to that birthday dinner, to the laughter, to the moment Rebecca smiled and said, "She just plays with foster kids." She was wrong. I wasn't playing. I was quietly building something that changed lives. And one day, without raising my voice, without trying to prove anyone wrong, the work spoke for itself. It always does. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. Every week we share stories about family, second chances, quiet strength, and the kind of justice that doesn't need revenge to be satisfying. And before you go, I'd love to ask you something. Have you ever spent years building something that other people dismissed, only for them to realize its value much later? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one.